You were introduced to vigilante justice and specifically lynching from the reading of Acuna, chapter 4. And I provide here three other sources. Actually, Acuna got his information from this one, Kerrigan and Webb. You're not going to be tested on these three sources. This is just sharing of information in case you're curious to learn more. But Yeah, the again that the old West trope serves to justify or as justification for the use of vigilante justice, people taking the law into their own hands. And in that chapter, you learned about how ethnic Mexicans were targeted for lynching in the Southwest. Now, I might not have used or explained what ethnic Mexican means, and I'll be using it increasingly. So yeah, I should make that clear. Now, so ethnic Mexican is a term that I use to include both Mexicans, meaning people born in Mexico, and Mexican Americans, people born in the US who are US citizens of Mexican descent. And so and let's see, from 1848, so the end of the Mexican-American War, to the end of the 1870s, ethnic Mexicans were lynched in the Southwest at a rate of 473 per 100,000. And Acuna brings up this comparison that African Americans during the same time in Mississippi, which had the highest rate of lynching for African Americans, had a rate of 53 per 100,000. Now, it is important to note that the African American population in the US was much larger than the ethnic Mexican population in the Southwest. So the numbers were smaller, but the rate of being targeted was far greater. But yeah, here's three books in case you're curious to learn more. And I also found this newspaper clipping interesting, kind of the defending of the lynching of Mexicans by saying this is not about racial hate. It was about law and order. And it was also a type of protest against a lenient governor that was not tough enough on these criminals, people perceived as criminals. Then we have the example of Josefa Segovia. She was at the time she was referred to as Juanita of Downeyville. So Josefa Segovia lived in Northern California. And in 1851, uh, on the night of 4th of July, there were Anglo-American miners celebrating the 4th of July holiday. And, the next year after California became a state. Uh, so she lived there, she had her house there, she's surrounded by all these miners. On the night of 4th of July, a drunk, angry miner starts banging on her door, demanding to see her husband. She tells him that her husband's not home, to go away. He left and then came back later, now technically the 5th of July. Same thing, banging the door until he broke the door and barged in. She then took a knife and stabbed him and killed him. Well, this was unacceptable to the miners of the area. So they had a kangaroo court, which is an expression for creating the farce of a court, pretending to have court when um, it's obviously they're not really interested in determining whether she's guilty or not or whether she was justified. They had already made up their mind. Uh, for example, there was a doctor who offered to testify, but when they realized he was testifying in her defense because he brought up that she was pregnant, they ended up kicking him off the stand and kicking him out of town. There was also a lawyer from Nevada who offered to testify in her favor, but instead got beat up and also kicked off the stand. And so, yeah, it just shows that they had zero interest in having an actual trial to determine whether she was justified in what she did. So immediately after this kangaroo trial, they lynched her. They put a noose on her and killed her. Now, why do we have these two names? You know, Juanita of Downeyville and Josefa Segovia. Well, the at the time, everyone referred to her as Juanita, and even the newspapers who wrote about this referred to her as Juanita. But it turns out that wasn't her name. Apparently, at that time, they had the assumption that most Mexican women were called Juanita, and so they just called her Juanita, even though it wasn't her name. Uh, she is so yeah, this happened on the 5th of July, 1851 in Northern California. She is believed to have been the only Mexican woman that we know of that was lynched in California.